Welcome to the Page One Podcast, a twice-weekly podcast featuring a variety of guests and thought leaders on topics ranging from channel strategies to tariffs, influencer marketing, best-in-class product launches, and all the details about how to accelerate your e-commerce sales with the big box retailers, or what we call R-commerce. Now here's your host, Luke Peters.
Thanks for joining us on the Page One Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Peters, and this is the podcast where I bring you the best and brightest leaders to share their consumer product sales and marketing strategies that will help you grow your business. I'm the CEO and founder of Newer Appliances, where I cut my teeth selling products online, and now have started Retail Band, where I hope to help other brands succeed in product launches, influencer marketing, and B2B online sales strategy. And right now I'm offering a free evaluation of your online sales strategy. So if you're interested, find me on LinkedIn or email me at luke@retailband.com. We can take a look at if you need help maybe doing a product launch, look at influencer marketing, or just your overall digital sales and channel strategy. And in this episode, we're going to learn from Shauna Lagatol on how innovating in CPG and food business models is different now compared to 5 to 10 years ago, and what the landscape of D2C retail will look like in 5 years. Shauna is a 17-year CPG, food and beverage veteran and considers herself an alternate route CEO. And her career began in bioscience to provide development to brand marketing, to business and general management, and now is CEO. She has transitioned from running Nestle Waters' first innovation accelerator business unit to the CEO of a dietary supplement, Wellen Inc. And Shauna, welcome to the Page One Podcast.
Great. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Cool. And a little bit more on you. Hopefully I don't botch up your college names here. Well, you graduated from Loyola in Maryland with a degree in biology and then received your master's from Quinnipiac University in molecular biology.
Quinnipiac, close.
I was close. All right, cool. Well, so anyways, listen, I'm thrilled to have you on the podcast, and I love the fact that you've got the science background. And so, and then you bring the, as a CEO approach with the science background to CPG category. So why don't we just start with, you have a lot of experience going back many years, and you worked at Nestle and Unilever. And so usually, and I know your newest company is right in startup mode. So usually I kind of run into, total number of employees or warehouse size, and I'm kind of trying to understand the brand. And that may not be the best question for your current company, but how about talking about the team that you managed at Nestle? Because that might give the audience just an idea for, what you're involved in.
Sure. So I've done a lot of innovation work, and I actually had an expat role at Nestle working on global innovation there, and had the opportunity to kind of rethink how we were doing innovation and really seeing a lot of having to go faster, having to launch and optimize, a lot of it inspired by the tech industry. So when I came back from my expat assignment, I pitched for us to have an innovation incubator accelerator team, which was really a team that was semi-siloed. I'd wanted to be more siloed than it was, of about 7 to 10 people that were cross-functionally marketers, R&D people, supply chain, et cetera. And we, purposely were trying to break, I don't say the Nestle rules, but the Nestle ways of doing things for a very big company. So how quickly could we get the concept, new concepts? How quickly could we develop those concepts and formulate them within the beverage space, quickly test them into market, optimize them, again, bring them back into market and have them ready to go for scale once they were fully optimized. So doing that really fast. So old timelines, when I first started innovation, you could launch a product usually in about 2 years. We were launching multiple products in about 6 months. But it came with a lot of focus and also kind of, I would say, separation from the larger organization.
Well, that's on theme then. So what we want to talk about in innovating in CPG. So are you able to kind of break that down a little bit more and tell us what changes you had to make to more quickly launch products? So it sounds like you went from a 2-year time frame and, you cut that thing in a quarter almost or about.
Yeah.
So what did it take? Yeah. Like what were the major changes that you put in place? I
think the first is getting closer to the consumers faster. So a lot of times we kick off a new project we always start with doing a lot of desk work. When you work at big companies, one of the things is always Nestle doesn't know what Nestle knows. Unilever doesn't know what Unilever knows. start out with some desk research. And usually when you go into, when it comes to consumer research, long rounds of qualitative work to build different concepts with consumers and in those old school focus groups with, you're behind the mirror as a marketer and you're looking at the consumers and the focus groups. And a lot of the work now is really about co-creation with consumers, working with consumers that are going to be more inspirational, kind of maybe are exhibiting behaviors on the edge of trends. No more kind of in the focus group type of old school mirror type of room. And then usually not doing such a large scale quant testing that you would often do. It would often take 6 to 8 weeks, 9 weeks, even if you're really fielding a very large, say like basis test. So we would do much more one-on-one consumer building, one-on-one in-store retail intercepts, quickly mocking up products. So we call them, minimal viable prototypes, MVPs. So not worrying about a prototype coming off of a line, but something that maybe even a designer is making in lab with their hands, and you're trying to get stimulus and products and the ideas immediately exposed to people as fast as you can. You're constantly iterating in what we call design sprints. And usually those sprints are planned out, and you're going to go through 2 or 3 sprints. You're going to optimize, and you're going to get it on a shelf and see how consumers react in a very controlled environment, whether it's a weekend test or a 4-week in-store test along those lines. And so I would say it's a much more agile response that's just not quite as quantitative data heavy.
Yeah. And so, and a couple of questions on that. So I have a friend who is CEO who runs his business like that. He'll do 6-week sprints and there can be good and bad from it because sometimes it's hard to finish what was originally planned, right? And they move on to the next sprint. But how were so you talked about design sprints. I love it because I guess, this is a period where you get everybody focused on something and you push them through it. But can you talk a little bit more about the length and like what type of team would be involved, and just in a way that other brands that are listening can kind of relate this to their business and consider a change on their product roadmap or supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, I was first introduced to the concept. I was lucky enough to do a very big project with IDEO, which is very famous, well-known design firm, and so really learn the methodology working with them. So usually it depends on the scope of the project and what you're innovating, but it's, with IDEO, we had a 12-week engagement. When we were coming up with my team in Nestle, we were working on a new product, product line, coming off of one of our regional spring waters. And we probably had, so it was a new sparkling water variant. We probably had 4 sprints, but they were planned out. So we knew that the first sprint, which usually is 3 to 4 days, you're probably with the team 5 days, which is a lot in corporate America. You're all hunkered down, usually a marketing person. If you're hiring an agency team, somebody creative, somebody that's writing copy. It's good if you can have your R&D person there because it's always better for a science person that speaks firsthand to hear from the consumers themselves. And usually you essentially have day 1 of consolidating information, day 2 of brainstorming, day 3 exposing stuff to consumers. That night you're optimizing the work, and day 4 you're back with consumers, usually one-on-one, bringing people in, and then kind of debriefing. And usually the sprints can be, here's your idea phase. Sprint 2 might be, okay, now you're ready to start exposing packaging and design. And maybe sprint 3 is you're finally at formulation stage and you're bringing the whole thing together.
Wow. Okay.
And it's kind of rapidly iterating it. And sometimes you actually, and I don't know how to say it other than it's product development 5 to 10 years ago was very linear. So you'd get your insight, you get your product idea, then you would go to packaging, then you would go to formulation, and you would do each in a step, and then you would move on. Innovation today very much is about the cycles and optimizing and kind of parallel pathing and optimizing all those things, really working on all those things at one time, and then kind of getting to your final product as you distill all that information.
I'm just thinking, well, quick question, but I like the customer engagement part. And a lot of brands, we could do some of that. And I guarantee you 95% of us listening will admittedly say we should do more of it. And we say we're doing it, but we're not doing it enough. And it sounds like you guys had a solid process around that, and obviously larger company. And we're talking about Nestle here, but what did that look like? I mean, where are these folks coming from? Is there an agency or a firm that says, hey, we have 20 people, that are part of this focus group? Or I'm just curious on how the focus group, how many people are you having to test the product through? and where that happens at the company?
Usually when you're engaged with an agency, and I've worked with really big agencies like IDEO doing this type of work, some smaller agencies in Spring Partners in New York. Usually IDEO has their own recruiting, so they're finding the consumers for you. Smaller agencies that I've worked with, either they actually have professionals that do the recruiting for you, or I've also done it, and this is how a startup could do it, where they've posted ads on Craigslist.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
So, hey, do you want to come in to do they'll call it a focus group or a one-on-one, or we're developing a new product, and there's still a screener. It's not just exposing it to anybody, but for whoever your consumer target is. So there's a variety of ways. There's also, if you can have a partnership in your local, if you're going to be in retail, and you happen to have a relationship with a retailer and say, hey, I'm going to be in your store for 2 hours, or a store manager at a local shop. We've done that before. We've also done something which was really, really fun and exciting, where we built a minimal viable prototype actually with IDEO, it was essentially, I'm not saying anything that isn't out there. It was a water dispenser where you could customize your water, kind of think about almost like a Coke freestyle for water. But it was a minimal viable prototype, really mocked up in foam. Oh, wow. So it wasn't working, but it looked that way. And we literally were on the streets, the Embarcadero in San Francisco, and grabbing people and saying, hey, we're building a product. Could you give us some feedback? And talking them through how it will work. We're literally, as they were walking by, we did it in 2 different types of income neighborhoods. So there's a lot of creative ways to do things. And I think one of the things I've learned is just because you're a big company it doesn't mean that you need big dollars to necessarily get consumer feedback. You can do it a lot in very much the same way as a startup. If people are willing to feel comfortable with an end size of 10, 20, 50, and not 100, which is a big shift.
Oh, you were getting
from what innovation was several years ago.
You were getting that much input, hundreds of people? Because I've heard.
No, that's what I'm saying. Usually quantitative data, you're getting in the hundreds.
Yeah.
And what we were doing is getting, in our sprint a week, we were getting 10 people, maybe feedback from 10 to 20 people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that sometimes it's difficult. And it's not people saying, I like this or I don't like this. The art of it is distilling what you're hearing, what you're not hearing, where the gaps are, where you hear emotion, I would say excitement or tension, and then distilling that for design, for the next step in design development.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. So I'm going to stay on this for a little bit. So would you, do you think companies are missing a lot? Let's talk about a smaller company. And I'm just thinking about the audience. The audience is going to range. And if have you ever been to the Housewares show, International Housewares out in Chicago? You ever? No. Yeah.
I'm sorry. No.
And so, there's such a range in brands. There's companies that are $1 billion, but, a lot of them are 5 to say 200 million. And, they might be, 20 to 150 people or something like that. And within those, do you think that brands like that are not doing in-person consumer testing like this are missing out? I mean, it's because I know you can do some of this online. And what I mean is usually, because it happens to all of us, the marketing department will find the data and say, hey, we should call it this. It should look like this. We should talk about this.
Right.
And that's, I think, what is mostly happening. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think they definitely should. I'll tell you one of my observations. Well, I'll tell you with my company right now, Wellen. I mean, we're pre-seed. There is no money, and how we kicked off. We knew we had a dietary supplement that was going to be for 50 plus consumers. We knew it was for arthritis and joint pain. We had no money, so the first thing we did was we had a little bit, right? We scheduled some ethnography, so 5 to 7 consumers, 55 plus. And so what I would say is one of the things I'm observing from smaller companies is there's so much pressure for sales and the idea and just talking about what the product does and the functional benefit. They skip over very often getting to the deep insight and really understanding who their consumer target is, like deeply, like what moves them emotionally, what are they scared, what worries them, what excites them, what drives them. And we got to some really amazing insights with this 50 plus consumer, which was, we wouldn't have done just from desk research. And that cost was very low. I mean, it was the recruiting cost plus, paying people about $100 for 2 hours. And so I feel that, there's definitely ways to get into really the beginning stage of building your brand, and which should be the backbone of all your creative development, with not necessarily a large number of people, and a way to do that, without big research budgets. But I feel like I'm even in the creative, I'm seeing with a lot of B2C brands, a lot of startups, it's just so product focused. There's a missing link in building that brand equity up front in the journey.
Yeah, guilty here. I mean, we're launching a beer froster, and a lot of us drink beer, so we think we know what's best. But you're right. It'd be, we're like, hey, we want cold beer or colder beer, or we want it to look like this. But that's us talking, right? And I think I'm glad we kind of went down this rabbit hole, because I think that's fascinating. And you kind of gave a nice tip on, you could just post this on Craigslist. Obviously, agencies can do it. And like you weren't using huge sample sizes. I've heard the same thing, 5 to 10. As long as the demographic and it's the right person who should be reviewing your product is vetted correctly, that you don't need a massive sample size, and that there's big takeaways. But at the same time, you got to have someone who's a good listener, just like you alluded to as well, and they really have to understand what's said and what isn't said. So I think that's fascinating, and sounds like you're bringing that to your new company. And talking about that, what I wanted to also dive into here was, how to win direct to consumer. And we kind of talked about that in the opening remarks. Mm-hmm. And I know things are changing so quick with channel strategies and Amazon taking control, but then direct to consumer becoming, in some cases, more of a challenge, because a lot of the consumers just start on Amazon. And I'd like to hear your thoughts about that. Like a few thoughts around, what your thought of success on direct to consumer is, what platforms you think are the best choices, if you have an opinion there. And then also, we can get into key positions. I guess I can ask that on the next question. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, and fully admitting, direct to consumer is very new for me, leaving traditional marketing and traditional legacy brands. But I have to say, now that I'm into it, if I was to go back to managing a legacy brand I would do it totally differently, because I do think that direct to consumer is the future of how brands, it is the future. It is the now, actually. It's not even the future of how brands will connect to consumers. When I came into Wellen, there was already, which is our dietary supplement, there was already there's a product, there's an ingredient, and we had to have a channel strategy. And coming from Nestle, I know, Amazon is not for free anymore.
Exactly.
It is, it is expensive to advertise. It is important, though. It's what people use for essentially a search vehicle after Google. And there's a lot of opportunity with your Amazon pages and the different Amazon platforms, being Prime and Now and grocery, to really tell a brand story. And I think that's an opportunity for people to tell more, very strong brand stories and what they stand for within Amazon. But for me, direct to consumer was definitely the opportunity for, especially a startup, to quantify, to optimize your creative, your message, your conversion, and to use that to quantify your model for funding and scale. And that was why I thought the laser focus of D2C, understanding and optimizing, the search, the paid media, the content, our website, and being able to really being able to hone in even, at the zip code level to understand what optimal conversions would be, so that we really wouldn't have to spend a ton of money until we knew we got it right. And then we would be able to build the quantitative model to then take to investors. Okay, and if we had another $500,000, in these different, media channels, whether it's paid mobile, et cetera, search, email marketing, then we would expect this return, or this percentage in scales. And as a person with a science background, I love numbers. Yeah. So the fact that you can get so granular is just amazing. And if I was at a big company again in my old role, and we were launching a new product for a very big legacy brand, that would be the data I would use trying to sell direct to consumer, whether it's a Poland Spring or whether it's a all laundry detergent, or whether I'm just thinking of the brands I worked on, Dove. I would use it as an internal selling tool, as a proof of principle before it actually was sold into the organization for the sales team to go sell. Mm-hmm. Because if you're doing innovation quickly, you no longer have the big tests and those large data points to sell into a large organization to mobilize. So if you could sell some of those innovations even quicker within your innovation accelerator and use that small scale data where the risk is very minimized exposure, you could use that, as which you need in these large organizations as selling points for even the buyers, not just internally within the organizations.
Yeah, and Shauna, now and as CEO, you're going to have of a startup, there's decisions to be made because obviously you're starting up, you have a leaner team. So kind of with that being said, thinking about key positions and key roles from a D2C perspective, what is really, really important to you, or what is maybe should be leveraged more? And what I mean by that is, obviously on D2C, you're going to need, someone to manage e-com, or maybe or sometimes companies go more of a branding approach, to compared to say a website, or or social media can be a strong outlet for some companies, but not for others, or email marketing or SEO. And I'm just curious on, what are your thoughts on that, on what is prioritized or the strategy or direction you're going to take?
Yeah. I think if I take it a level up, so like whenever I build a team, I've built several teams. I always build a team thinking about them almost like linked together, right? It's not hiring one person. It's thinking about what is my strength, like what are my core functional strengths and leadership strengths. What are my weaknesses? What do I need to balance that? And then the group of people that I need, how are they going to work together? So you need probably, someone that thinks really out of the box. You need a naysayer. You need somebody that's a little bit traditional, versus another skill set. So that's just, I would say, from a higher level. So me coming into this role, I was looking for someone being weaker in D2C or being newer to me. And I'm stronger in branding development and innovation and supply chain operations. What was important for me was to find a partner in particular that could help me with digital strategy and literally teach me. And I being very vulnerable and saying this, literally teach me to make sure that I was really learning while I was doing extremely hands-on, essentially the digital ecosystem, other than what's done, I would say, at traditional digital agencies and with legacy brands. So I actually hired someone that is an NYU professor.
Oh wow!
And also she teaches a digital marketing program, a master's program at NYU. And she also has a small agency called Spiderweb. And we essentially created a freelance network with her that has. And so to me, the roles that were super important was someone that really understands the analytics, someone that really understands email marketing, the CRM. I've learning the difference between the different platforms and Shopify, et cetera. I'm learning with them. They know I'm all the calls and learning at the same time. For me, it's not a matter of which one is stronger than another. It's a matter of what's balancing who. So, for instance, I actually felt I could be the social media manager for certain things, for where we are at this beginning stage, right?
Yeah. Analytics,
I really needed somebody. Email marketing really needed somebody within that freelance network. And we started. I built that essentially with this person that was kind of leading the overall digital team. Within our freelance network. That's a very long-winded answer.
No, it's fascinating that you have this freelance network, and I'd love to hear more about that. I mean, what does that mean? So you're able to, I know what it means, but it's hard to put together a reliable team of freelancers, because I'm guessing they're doing work for other companies as well. You hire them, and then you kind of got to manage the time or the activity or the process that they're working on. How does that look? Just overall.
Yeah, I think the one good thing, people worry about people's big company experience, doing well in startups. The one thing that I was able to leverage is connections and the relationships that I've had through different, working with different agencies over the years. So no, we can't work with OV or, FCB or big advertising agencies, but I did a lot of those big agencies. Frankly, the reality is most of them just outsource freelancers. So you just have to get to the people underneath the big agencies, and you really kind of do that with relationships. So I've worked with a strategy, ex-BBDO freelancer. I've done this actually for years at Nestle, working with me again. We hired, obviously, the digital freelancers. I actually did continue to work with my graphic design agency that I worked with Nestle. So there was a balance for me in building a team of people that I knew and trusted, but also people that were new to me and could push me and teach me that I felt very comfortable with, that were going to push me, challenge me, push back. So, hey, Shauna, you should think about X, Y, and Z. But balanced with people that I also know that I've worked with, confident with, that can deliver. Because a lot's at stake, and there's not a lot of money to make. There's not. You can't really afford too many mistakes to start
exactly.
a world. You literally can't afford them.
Wow. So those freelancers, do you think they're exclusive to you, or are you saying no? They have other jobs. They have other roles as well.
Oh yeah, no, they definitely have other jobs. Yeah, they're definitely working multiple.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's a couple of other. What I'm discovering, which is a bit new to me, is a lot of the freelancers are even. And literally, this would be me on Google. So I was finding a freelance R&D person to do some formulation work. I was looking for different people for packaging help and design. Actually, the Food Expo West people were quite helpful in providing different networks. So they also, you can find them. You can find a lot of them on LinkedIn, even posting. I had a lot of people responding, hey, I know this person that does SEO. I know this person that does graphic design. So a lot of it is networking, just to find the right.
I was going to ask you that actually. So where would you, recommend that people go look to find freelancers? I mean, obviously there's a lot of platforms, we can find people on Fiverr, but we'll do that. And we've used freelancers, and when you find a good one, they're gold, but sometimes it's really hard. It's a lot of work, right? You go through 2 or 3 that may not work out. Any ideas there or suggestions?
I hate to say it, but it's usually somebody that I get from a recommendation from someone that says, hey, Shauna, I'm forgetting it. Somebody just recommended me to a freelance network that was really good. But usually it's through word of mouth and recommendations. I will say too, what I found with the dietary supplement industry, and I think every industry is a little different. It's very tight. A little tighter, much tighter than beverage, although beverage is pretty tight, but it's still big beverage. So once I connected with several people on LinkedIn, I realized that they were also connected together. So you kind of, you'd be talking to someone and say, well, I was, working with so-and-so in packaging. And say, oh, I've worked with them before. It's just you realize the world is a little bit smaller than you think it is once you kind of start digging in on who's an expert at what. Yeah.
And so your experience coming from large companies to a startup, what is something that you think you're bringing differently, like maybe an advantage from the larger companies that maybe somebody who hasn't had that experience wouldn't have when they come to a small startup?
I would say there is, big companies there's a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of politics, there's always a lot of processes, but there is something to process and structure and discipline. So for instance, when I had my freelancer network starting up and, was asking, okay, let's put the timeline together. And, this is a very simplified example, but the quality of the timeline, and it's like, well, should we put in an Excel spreadsheet? Well, no, we should put in a Microsoft project. So little things like managing a meeting, pushing teams to deadlines, making sure deadlines are hit, making sure everyone are clear what the objectives are. That comes very natural in a large organization. At least I found at a startup, it's I've just found that because everyone comes from a different starting point, and when you're bringing these groups of people together, and sometimes they're talking and they're a team and they're not face to face either. People can be remote. You have to really work very hard to kind of get everybody on the same page and set the expectations of this is the bar of work that I'm expecting. This is what we need to be successful, and really upfront and straightforward. And I think I get that from my classical marketing training in business management.
Yep, for sure. Because sometimes at smaller, we're little 50 people or less. And, it's fun being the Wild West sometimes, but yeah, you bring the big company approach, and it's a totally different dynamic. And we have some folks here that have come from larger companies, and it's great. It's also that diversity, kind of like you talked about at the beginning, where you want people that kind of fill in your gaps, right? And that's kind of what you hire around. Mm-hmm. Quick question on that, Shauna, just because I'm curious, and I'm always, selfishly, I always ask these questions for myself, but I think it's also would be interesting to other CEOs listening. But what do you use for holding folks accountable? It sounded like you mentioned Microsoft Project. Is there a software like that, or smartsheets, or something that you found that's easy to use and kind of keeps your notes and, deadlines together for your direct reports?
We were I was looking to use, and I think we will at some point, a more formal software that was, and there are a bunch of them now, and of course it's escaping me. Right now we're using Google Docs, honestly. It's created formats and deadlines, essentially Google Docs for tracking and things like that. Definitely some sort of hub. But there's other, Microsoft Office, I believe, has something. And I had a loss, but there were a couple of,
We've used Asana. The Asanas is. Yeah,
exactly. Those I was going through the different options. The biggest thing, I think, what I was anticipating, and we're not there yet, is when you're really starting to deal with large large pieces of creative, or, so I have a label that's been designed by the agency that's in New York, the nutritionist that has to look at the labels in Connecticut, the creative person is, wherever she, in Brooklyn. And so having a place where you can have all of those documents and being allowed people to comment, so you're not going back and forth with emails and things like that. Really have to figure out how the communication flow is going to be with a remote team. Is what my experience is so far, versus you're at a big company, you're going into your office, you're all looking at each other. Of course, I've also worked on global teams where you're doing emailing and things like that. But I think the other thing is all of these freelancers are working on 5 other freelance teams.
Yep.
Right. So they're not only working on your business. So you want to make sure that the data stream, their information stream, the communication stream, is pretty straightforward for them, and they don't have to do a lot of work to in a way to be able to respond to you quickly, be able to give clear feedback, that type of thing.
Yep. So that's always a challenge, because sometimes it can be a lot of work just to use one of these programs like an Asana. What happens is, they're great, but then sometimes too many processes are created, by the person who's kind of administrating it.
That's exactly what happened. That's how we got back to Google Docs, because that was what was happening.
It goes, then it's you have 4 pages, to launch a product, which literally we had. So that's the problem.
Yeah.
Speaking of product launches, you guys will be doing them, I'm sure, at Wellen, and then you've it sounds like have been involved with those in the past at Nestle. Can you share kind of, what your goals are, or what your strategy is going to be maybe in the future, or if it's easier, what the process looked like at Nestle, just from a perspective of, the brands that are listening and what they can, take into their own companies?
Yeah, I think the one I would say with Wellen, we were planning on launching. We're launching one. We have one SKU, dietary supplement. We're working on maybe it's to a starter kit that someone would receive, and then a refill that they would receive in essentially a monthly subscription model. And our plan had been, we're a little delayed, is to launch where you can kind of really amplify your message. So we were looking at Founder Made as an option. It's essentially a startup trade show in New York City. I think they also are in LA. It's obviously Food Expo West. So I think there's something about kind of launching, almost soft launching, so that you can get some feedback a little bit from buyers, from people that are walking around on the shows.
Yep.
A soft launch at a big company might be launching only at one retailer 6 months early, that type of thing, or a test market. And then I would say the other thing to think about it that's different than what I used to do. We used to think about launch after the product was done. And I would say now, because things are much more, especially in B2C, focused and targeted and, laser streamed, and even in the retail environment, a lot of retailers, they actually would like exclusive launches if you're Target, or something specific for them, specific SKU, specific flavor variant, etc. But you really want to think about how you're going to launch and execute when you start. What is the price point that you need to hit? What is the channel you really want to design for? Whole Foods is really different than Walmart and that consumer and that shopper. And I think thinking about launch in the dynamic of it doesn't have to be for everybody. Gen Pop, I think more and more products are much more focused for their for different consumer targets than necessarily for the masses. And I think the benefit of a small company versus a large is, I think before it used to be you got to get 80%, 90% ACV right off the bat. And it's really difficult to do that, really, I bet, in any category these days. So where do you really want to do well? Where do you want to win? What is success? What is the market share in that channel? What is the turns? And then based on that channel strategy and that price, how are you going to reach that consumer?
And that's what I was going to, that was, I guess the next question was, getting eyeballs on it, because that can be so expensive now, especially D2C. And you mentioned, launching at a trade show, definitely getting buyers, feedback. But then how about the next part, which is, especially on a D2C website, you're launching it. Now you got to drive traffic to that website. And, a lot of it, well, I'm sure at the beginning is going to be paid. But you want as much free or press traffic as possible, obviously, to kind of counterbalance that. Any thoughts or strategies on that end?
Yeah, there's something I've been playing with it, thinking about it for a while. And I actually read a book. It's Play Bigger, Play Harder by Al Ramadan, I believe it is his last name. And there was a premise of like, how do you leverage what's happening on in the moment to amplify your media message, essentially. So for instance, one of the things with Wellen, we're targeting 50 plus, right? And there is a huge discourse happening right now around ageism. You're seeing a lot of Twitter hashtags, et cetera. So one of the thoughts that we were having is actually, how do you pre-develop creative? And then when there is like a social discourse happening or a Twitter trend, that's when you're actually going to amplify your media. So you're kind of getting more bang for your buck, if you will, because it's happening at the same time as a larger discourse or discussion. It's more likely to be clicked on if more people are aware of something that's going on, within that space.
Yeah, that's genius.
And that's a very different creative model too. If you think about traditional creative agencies and media buying, you almost kind of are waiting for that Dunkin' Donuts dunk in the dark, right? Remember the Super Bowl a few years ago when the lights went out?
Yeah.
And not Dunkin' Donuts, I'm sorry. Oreo had that, viral post. And what a lot of people don't know is that there was actually a media team, like all of the big brands do. They have a media team that's sitting and waiting and looking at their posts. And when the lights went out, that team upped that media spend, and that thing went viral for a reason. Genius and extremely opportunistic, but the team was ready, and it got more eyes on that ad. So it's a little bit of that kind of waiting, and you do have to think about setting up your team, and your agency team, and your model in a little bit different way to react that way. But that was one of the things we are thinking about with Wellen.
I think that's great.
How to deploy some of our media, especially on launch.
Yeah, I mean, it's unique. It makes sense, but for whatever reason, it's pretty new to me to be thinking in that way. So I think that's great. I mean, there's always we have a political season, and unfortunately the coronavirus and stuff like that. And there's so many things, that are just spiking in the media. So this is just market around what's on trend or market around what's spiking. I think that's great. It's definitely worth us thinking more about at all of our companies and seeing, what that means, to our marketing teams.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'm sure the digital marketers, the real analytics people would tell you too, there's a way to do it by getting into the algorithms and things like that and to amplify that.
Yeah.
But that would be the person on my team that would be specializing and leading in that.
Yeah. I mean, they live in it day in and day out. So they're already thinking in that way. Cool. So Shauna, I was going to ask you, what are, obviously you've worked with some large companies, you're now CEO, you've had a really successful career. What is something that's maybe a habit or a ritual or a practice that you've learned or done that has made you a better person, at work or at home?
So I was lucky. I had a coach, Nestle had gotten me a coach who recommended a book that was called Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. And it's a super easy read, but I was having trouble. I'm like a typical type A, go really fast. Sometimes I'm like a couple of steps ahead of people, and one of the things that book really helped me do, which I really try to practice now, whether it's at work, whether it's out of the office, whether it's like with my husband, is to really ask deep and inquisitive questions, and to really, especially with I would say direct reports and things like that at work, to really not give my opinion as much and to slow myself down to really understand like where the person is coming from. And that can be anything from, often if you're presenting to an investor or a really high level leader at a large organization, and if they say something in they have to say something in a meeting, they usually don't ask you a question. You don't necessarily agree with it. Your gut instinct is kind of to defend it instead of asking them, well, help me understand a little bit more exactly where you're coming from, or I've heard you. You just you're concerned about X, Y, and Z, but is there another way to look at it? And I found that even making a little bit of a game of like, how many questions can you ask someone not in an annoying way, but essentially to get to the root of what it is that they want to discuss or do they have an issue with is a great way to make people feel seen and heard, and to more engaged and enabled. Like, it's not all about you. It's about the people that you're engaging with and talking to. And that book was really, really helpful for me at a really important point in my career, especially as a leader.
Yeah, no, great advice. Great advice. I picked up the same thing from various books and, just ask deep questions. But like you said, don't just jump to give your opinion. It's hard to do that as a leader, but it's so important.
It's hard.
It is so hard, huh?
Especially if you're like, most CEOs or most, people, we are the way we are for a reason. We're successful for a reason. But sometimes you have to to really be successful and really inspire people, because no one can do anything by themselves. You got to make people feel seen and heard and valued. And
also so they can feel confident to hopefully tell you everything, which can also be a challenge. Yeah. But that's great. And I think, why don't we wrap it up with a tough question here? And that would be, what is your biggest mistake? Maybe a big regret or something that you learned from that maybe the listeners can learn from? I was trying to think of my biggest business mistake, but I thought, I don't know. I think I can't think of too many because, it's you just pivot when you make mistakes. Yeah. But one of the things I actually would say in this transition from Nestle to Wellen and making that choice, I had an amazing sponsor, mentor. And one of the things he had me do, which I really regret that I didn't do sooner, was to write a 5-year plan. And he had me, and we spent a lot of time on it, kind of write what my goals were, what my financial goals were over 5 years, my things goals, like, do you want a condo in Florida? Do you want a golf membership? My community goals, my personal goals, and then my career goals. And a lot of times I think we just, you think about just your career goals in a silo. And when I got crystal clear on what my goals were in each of those things, I thought, man, I wish I had done this. I'm 42. I wish I'd done this ages ago, because it helped really crystallize the career decisions I was going to make in relation to, my personal decisions, my family decisions, and the different roads that we were going to take. And I regret that I didn't do that sooner. I was just too focused on, I guess, siloing those different aspects of my life. But I'm very lucky I had somebody to help bring me along that. Yeah, but like you said, we do it in business. How come we don't do it in personal life? So I think it's super important. And yeah. And it's funny, like whenever I'll have similar lessons, that I'll tell people at work, and, so I'm 46. So I tell them, you don't have to wait until you're 46 to know these things, start when you're 25, because then you're just going to be so much further ahead of everybody else. And so the theme there is write your goals down, get them on paper, review them. They're going to change, but at least that's going to guide you the right way. It's going to give you the compass that you need to, point yourself in the right direction. So that's good story. Cool. So, how can listeners find you? Is LinkedIn the best way, or, what's the best place for listeners to contact you?
Yeah, definitely LinkedIn. Anyone's you find me on LinkedIn. I'm there. And our Wellen website is not up yet, but I would say LinkedIn is the best way, and I'm on it all the time. So
awesome.
Feel free. Mm-hmm.
Well, listen, it's been a pleasure. It's been a really awesome interview with so many good insights. And so thanks for coming on, and I appreciate you coming on the Page One podcast. And also want to thank all of you, the listeners, for coming on the Page One podcast, or for listening to the Page One podcast. And just remember, we're offering that free evaluation of your digital strategy. We take a look and see if influencer marketing is right for your product launch, or understand if you're maximizing your digital sales channels on, say, Home Depot or Walmart or Wayfair or any of those other areas. We'll take a look. We'll do it for free. And then we'll provide you with kind of a quick little roadmap and see how we can potentially work together and improve your digital sales. And just want to thank all of the listeners. Appreciate all of your comments and your reviews on iTunes. And we'll catch you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Page One podcast with Luke Peters. If you like our show and want to know more, check out our other segments. Also, please help us out by leaving us a rating on iTunes. Want to learn more about our commerce? Check out www.retailband.com to get more great tips and tricks on how to accelerate your e-commerce sales with the big box retailers.